He came to fix her kitchen light, a simple favor for a widow he barely knew. But when Alara touched his arm and whispered, "Stay a little longer," the air turned electric with what shouldn't be. What she did next would haunt him every sleepless night. I stepped out of my old pickup truck, the engine ticking as it cooled under the heavy gray sky that pressed down on the Whispering Oaks apartments on the edge of Tacoma. The air was thick with that November dampness, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your joints, making everything feel a little heavier, a little more reluctant. At 23, I was still piecing together what adult life was supposed to look like. Part-time gigs, fixing electrical issues in rundown buildings, a community college degree in engineering that hadn't opened any grand doors yet, and a nagging sense that I was just treading water. My name's Harlan Voss, and I'd come here because of a call from Alara Thorne, the widow of my dad's old friend Marcus. He'd been gone over a year now, taken by a heart attack that hit like a thief in the night, and I'd promised him once, in his garage while we tinkered with old radios, that I'd look out for her if anything happened. The flickering kitchen light she mentioned on the phone seemed like a small way to keep that word. I grabbed my toolbox from the truck bed, the cold metal biting into my palm, and climbed the concrete stairs, each step echoing in the quiet complex. The place had seen better days. Railings with chipped paint flaking off like old memories, balconies cluttered with forgotten potted plants wilting in the chill, and the faint scent of pine from the evergreens that bordered the parking lot, whispering secrets in the wind. Unit 214 had a worn welcome mat that read, "Home Sweet Home," in faded letters, a relic from happier times. I knocked twice, the sound sharp against the muffled hum of a distant TV from another apartment, and waited, shifting my weight as the seconds stretched. The door opened, and there she was, Alara, standing in the threshold with that composed grace I'd glimpsed at the funeral. She looked to be in her late 30s, carrying those years in the subtle lines around her eyes, the kind that spoke of laughter once shared and sorrows quietly borne. Her dark hair was pulled back casually, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and she wore a soft sweater over jeans that hugged her form in a way that was effortless, not deliberate. Her hazel eyes met mine with a polite smile, but there was a weariness in them, like she'd been carrying an invisible load for too long. "Harlan," she said, her voice warm yet edged with fatigue, "I appreciate you making the trip. I hate to bother you, but this light's been acting up for weeks." "It's no bother, Mrs. Thorne," I replied, gripping the toolbox tighter to steady myself. I'd always used the formal title out of respect, even though she'd suggested otherwise once. Marcus's absence still hung in the air like an unspoken rule. She stepped aside, and as I entered, a faint herbal aroma, chamomile tea perhaps, wafted from the kitchen, mixing with the subtle scent of her, something clean and faintly floral that caught me off guard. The apartment was a snapshot of a life interrupted. Walls lined with photos of her and Marcus on hikes through the misty trails of the Cascades, their smiles frozen in time. A bookshelf overflowing with dog-eared engineering texts and mystery novels that Marcus had loved. A leather couch worn from years of evenings spent together, facing a window that offered a view of the rolling hills shrouded in fog. But beneath it all, there was a palpable emptiness, as if the rooms were holding their breath, waiting for something to fill the void. She led me to the kitchen, where the overhead light hummed and flickered erratically, casting unsteady shadows on the tiled counters. "I've tried everything, new bulbs, even smacked it a few times," she said with a faint chuckle, flipping the switch to show me. "Nothing works." I nodded, setting down the toolbox with a thud and unfolding the stepladder she'd pointed to in the hall closet. As I climbed up and began unscrewing the fixture, I felt her presence in the doorway, watching not intrusively, but with a quiet attentiveness that made the space feel smaller. The wires were tangled, a loose connection worn from moisture and time, and as I worked, we fell into easy talk about the relentless Tacoma rain, how the holidays loomed like an obligation, and the gridlock from new developments sprouting up downtown. Her voice had a soothing rhythm, measured and thoughtful, contrasting with the hurried chatter I was used to from people my age. When I tightened the last screw and the light steadied into a warm, consistent glow, I climbed down, wiping my hands on my jeans. "That should hold," I said, packing up. She leaned against the counter, her fingers idly tracing the rim of a mug, her expression softening. "You're talented, Harlan. Marcus always said you'd go far with this stuff. He was proud of you, you know." The mention of him stirred something in me, a mix of gratitude and a sharp pang of loss. I shrugged, feeling the weight of her gaze. He was the one who showed me the ropes. If anything else breaks, just say the word. It was meant lightly, but in the quiet kitchen, it landed heavier, echoing the solitude that seemed to wrap around her like a shroud. No children, no pets, just the tick of the wall clock and the distant patter of rain starting outside. She insisted on tea before I left, and I accepted, not wanting to rush off. We sat at the small wooden table, steam curling up from our mugs, the herbal scent filling the air. Conversation deepened subtly. She spoke of the apartment feeling oversized now, of contemplating a move but dreading the task of sorting through Marcus's belongings. "It's foolish, holding on," she said, stirring her tea slowly, her eyes distant. "But letting go, it's like admitting it's really over." I listened, my own losses paling in comparison. Grandpa a few years back, but nothing like a partner ripped away. "It sounds tough," I offered, my voice quieter than intended. "Navigating all that alone." Her gaze lifted, holding mine a fraction longer, and in that moment a subtle shift occurred, like a current stirring beneath calm waters. Vulnerability flickered in her eyes, raw and unguarded, pulling at something deep in me. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes as rain began to lash against the glass in earnest. "Storm's rolling in hard," she noted, glancing out. "You might want to wait it out. Roads get slick around here." I hesitated, glancing at my watch. Part of me itched to bolt back to my cramped downtown rental, bury myself in resumes and distractions. But another part, stirred by memories of Marcus's stories about Alara's quiet strength, made me stay. "Yeah, all right, just until it passes." We migrated to the living room, where she turned on some low jazz, the saxophone notes weaving through the room like smoke. She curled up on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, and I took the armchair opposite, the cushions sinking under me. Talk flowed, books we'd escaped into, trips that lingered in memory. She recounted a journey to the Olympic Peninsula with Marcus, hiking rain-slick paths through ancient forests that felt otherworldly. "It was pure magic," she said, her voice trailing with nostalgia. "But revisiting alone, it wouldn't capture that spark." I shared my aspirations, launching a small repair outfit, maybe venturing to Europe to study centuries-old wiring in cathedrals. It felt naive next to her experiences, but she listened with genuine focus, her head tilted, encouraging. As the storm intensified, thunder rumbling in the distance, the room dimmed, shadows lengthening. I'd been there over an hour, the air growing warmer, thicker with unspoken layers. When she refilled our mugs, her fingers brushed mine in the handoff. Accidental, yet the warmth lingered, sending a quiet ripple through me. She didn't withdraw immediately, her eyes meeting mine with a softness that unsettled me. "Oops," she murmured, but the word didn't match the lingering gaze. I cleared my throat, heat creeping up my neck. "All good." Internally, a confusion stirred. She was older, Marcus's widow, a figure of respect, not someone to spark this odd curiosity. The rain showed no mercy, and she proposed dinner, pasta with fresh sauce, a simple gesture of thanks. I helped in the kitchen, chopping vegetables side by side, our movements syncing in the confined space. Arms brushed, elbows nudged, each contact amplifying the undercurrent like static building before a spark. Over the meal, talk turned intimate. She opened up about Marcus's final days, the hospital vigils, holding his hand through endless nights, whispering futures that slipped away. "You prepare for the worst," she said, her fork pausing midair, voice barely above a whisper, "but it still shatters you." Empathy surged in me, and without thinking, I reached across, covering her hand with mine. It was comfort, nothing more, or so I told myself. Her skin was warm, steady, and she didn't pull back. Instead, her fingers curled slightly, eyes locking on mine with an intensity that made my pulse thunder. "Harlan," she breathed, "you're too kind, and so young. Life's just opening for you." I swallowed, the room spinning slightly. "Youth doesn't shield you from understanding hurt." The words lingered, charged, and for a heartbeat, I sensed she might bridge the gap further. But she withdrew gently, rising to clear dishes, the moment fracturing. The storm eased to a drizzle as night fell, streetlights glowing orange on wet asphalt. I could have left, but her quiet plea, "Stay a bit more?" Company's rare these days, kept me rooted. Back on the couch, closer now, we watched rain trace rivulets on the glass. Stories unfolded, her Portland upbringing, meeting Marcus in college, forging their shared path. I confessed my fears, stagnating like my dad at the mill, chasing stability that felt elusive. Tension mounted in fragments, a shared laugh echoing too long, her foot grazing mine under the table, her sweater slipping to reveal a graceful collarbone. I averted my eyes, cheeks warming, but she noticed, her tone softening further. As she rose to silence the music, returning to sit nearer, our thighs nearly touching, the room pulsed with possibility. "I'm glad you stayed," she said, eyes sincere. "It's eased the quiet." "Me too," I managed, throat tight. In that deepening night, with the storm fading, a forbidden draw anchored me, a blend of care, intrigue, and an ache I couldn't name. This was only the beginning, but I had no idea how quickly things could spiral beyond control. The clock ticked past 9, its steady rhythm a quiet underscore to the fading storm outside, where the rain had softened into a persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of the world beyond the window. Alara shifted on the couch, drawing her knees up in a way that made the space between us feel both intimate and charged, like the air before lightning strikes. At 23, I was still navigating the murky waters of adulthood, where decisions felt like gambles and emotions like uncharted territory. And sitting here with her, a woman in her late 30s, marked by experiences I could only glimpse, stirred a confusion I hadn't anticipated. Her presence was a quiet force, pulling me in without effort, her hazel eyes reflecting the dim lamplight, as if holding stories she wasn't ready to fully share. We delved into dreams that had been shelved, hers of sketching the sun-drenched ruins in Florence, a trip she'd planned with Marcus but never taken, life intervening with its relentless demands. "We always said next year," she murmured, her fingers absently twisting the edge of her sweater, the fabric soft and worn from countless washes. "But next year turned into never. It's funny how time slips away when you're not looking." There was no self-pity in her tone, just a quiet reflection that resonated with my own unspoken regrets, making the room feel smaller, the connection deeper. I opened up about my hesitations, the job application for that engineering position in Seattle sitting half-finished on my laptop back home, the fear of uprooting myself to a city that seemed too vast, too unforgiving. "It's like standing at the edge of a drop," I said, staring into my empty mug, the ceramic cool against my palms. "One step forward, and there's no going back. What if I fall flat?" My voice carried the uncertainty of someone still testing the weight of his own ambitions, raw and unpolished. She turned toward me, her expression a blend of empathy and quiet encouragement, those late 30s years lending her words a depth that felt grounding. "You won't fall, Harlan. Not if you trust the ground beneath you." Marcus saw that strength in you. He'd tell stories about your quick fixes in the garage, how you'd figure things out on the fly. Her mention of him brought a subtle shadow to her face, a reminder of the life she'd lost, but it also bridged us, tying my past to hers in ways that felt both comforting and complicated. As the night wore on, the drizzle tapping insistently against the panes, she suggested a glass of wine to ease the lingering tension. "Nothing heavy. Just one to unwind, she said with a small, tentative smile that lit her features softly. I don't often have company for this. I agreed, watching as she retrieved a bottle of red from a high cabinet, her movements graceful despite the subtle fatigue in her posture. She poured with care, the deep crimson swirling in the glasses, and we toasted lightly, the clink echoing in the hushed space. The wine was smooth, with hints of berry and oak, warming me from within and loosening the knots I'd carried all evening. Talk deepened, flowing into the raw edges of loss. She spoke of the months after Marcus's passing, the bureaucratic maze of forms and calls, the well-meaning visits from friends that dwindled as time passed, leaving her in an echoing solitude. Everyone has their own lives, she said, sipping slowly, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. They check in at first, but then it's just you and the quiet. You learn to fill it, or at least pretend to. Her words hit a chord, echoing my own quiet struggles with family strains, the way I'd become the unspoken mediator in my parents' muted conflicts over finances and fading dreams. In response, I shared more than I intended, about the pressure of being the reliable one since high school, fixing not just wires but frayed relationships, all while wondering if I'd ever build something truly my own. Sometimes it feels like I'm patching leaks in a sinking ship, I admitted, the wine emboldening me, my fingers tracing the stem of the glass. But who fixes the fixer? Alara set her glass down, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that pierced the dim light. Maybe no one does it alone. Maybe it's about sharing the load, even if just for a night. Her hand rested on the cushion midway between us, close enough that I could feel the subtle heat from her skin, and that proximity ignited a spark of awareness, a pull I fought to ignore. The wine had softened the boundaries, making the forbidden seem almost tangible, but I reminded myself of the gaps. Her age, her history, the ghost of Marcus lingering in every corner. We finished the bottle amid lighter anecdotes, her recounting a botched camping escapade where Marcus had left the tent stakes behind, leading to a night under the stars in pouring rain, me sharing a college mishap that nearly cost me a semester, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly. Our chuckles filled the room, easing the weight, but each shared glance stretched longer, heavier with unspoken questions. At one point, as she brushed a stray crumb from my sleeve, leftover from dinner, her fingers grazed my arm, lingering just a beat too long. The touch was fleeting, innocent on the surface, but it sent a quiet thrill through me, warmth spreading like the wine in my veins. She withdrew quickly, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "My apologies," she whispered, though her eyes held a different story, one of curiosity and conflict. "It's nothing," I replied, my voice dropping lower, the air between us thickening with an energy I couldn't name. She was Marcus's widow, a woman whose life experiences dwarfed mine, and yet in that instant she seemed as exposed as I felt. Two people adrift, seeking anchor in the storm. Reason urged me to stand, gather my things, and brave the night, but my body stayed put, drawn by the quiet magnetism of her presence. Midnight crept in, the drizzle finally ceasing, leaving a profound silence that amplified every breath, every shift of fabric. Alara rose to clear the glasses, and I followed to the kitchen, insisting on assisting, our bodies navigating the narrow space with a synchronicity that felt almost rehearsed. Side by side at the sink, she washed while I dried, elbows brushing, hands occasionally grazing as dishes passed between us. The routine was mundane, yet laced with intimacy, like a glimpse into a life not ours. "You really don't have to," she said softly, handing me a dripping glass, her fingers wet and cool against mine. "I want to," I countered, holding her gaze, the words carrying more weight than intended. In that suspended moment, with the kitchen light casting gentle shadows on her face, highlighting the graceful lines of her maturity, a question hung unspoken in her eyes. Drying the final piece, I turned fully toward her, the counter digging into my back as she stood mere inches away, her lavender scent enveloping me, stirring a restlessness I pushed down. "Harlan," she began, her tone a whisper laced with hesitation. "Tonight, having you here has been a balm I didn't know I needed, more than I expected." Her hand trembled faintly as she adjusted a strand of hair, vulnerability etching her features. "For me as well, Alara," I said, dropping the formal title, the name feeling bold on my tongue. Our proximity was electric, her breath mingling with mine, and I could see the golden flecks in her hazel eyes, the subtle signs of her 38 years that added to her quiet allure. She paused, then her fingers traced lightly up my arm, a tentative exploration that sent shivers racing across my skin. "But you're so young with everything ahead, and I'm not sure where this leads." The touch was fire, her pulse quickening under my grasp as I covered her hand, holding it steady, our rhythms aligning in the quiet. "Maybe it doesn't need a map," I murmured, my other hand rising to gently cup her cheek, her skin soft and yielding slightly under my thumb. She leaned into it briefly, eyes fluttering shut, time dilating in the warmth of the moment. Then, as if jolted, she stepped back, severing the connection, her breath uneven. "I can't do this," she said, voice cracking with regret. "Marcus is still too present, and you're almost like kin." Yet her eyes contradicted her, brimming with a yearning that echoed my own turmoil, the push and pull of desire against duty. I nodded, honoring the line she'd drawn, though the absence of her touch left a hollow ache. "I get it." The silence that followed was thick, unresolved, until she proposed I stay on the couch if the roads remained treacherous. "It's late, and safety first," she added, averting her eyes, busying herself with linens. I consented, the decision heavy with implications. She arranged blankets and a pillow with precise movements, her robe brushing the floor. "Sleep well, Harlan," she said from the hallway, her silhouette etched against the bedroom light. "You too," I replied, settling in. But rest eluded me. The couch was firm, the apartment silent except for occasional creaks, my mind replaying every nuance, the brushes, the confessions, the near miss. What was this stirring? Empathy twisted into attraction, a line I shouldn't cross. Around 2, her door creaked open, footsteps soft on the carpet. Alara emerged, robes cinched tight, hair disheveled, sitting on the coffee table's edge. "Restless?" I asked, propping up on an elbow. She nodded, the moonlight filtering through curtains to illuminate her face. "Thoughts won't quiet." We whispered then, delving into fears and what-ifs. The emptiness of her bed without Marcus, the forgotten art of feeling truly understood. "You've stirred that reminder tonight," she admitted, her voice threaded with emotion. I took her hand and she allowed it, our fingers lacing in the dimness, a silent tether amid the chaos. Words faded, the connection sufficed, but as Dawn hinted, reality intruded, she older, bound by grief, me young, unbound yet unready. Dawn's light seeped in as I folded the linens, thoughts churning. Alara appeared, composed for the day, brewing coffee as if the night were a dream. Yet the shift was undeniable, lingering in every glance. Everything is heading toward a finale you can't brush off. What she does now will leave a mark on him forever. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains of Alara's living room, painting the folded blankets on the couch in shades of gold, where I'd spent a restless night chasing fragments of sleep. The coffee she'd brewed sat heavy in my mug, its bitter warmth grounding me as I stood in her kitchen, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the faint lavender of her presence. At 23, I was still carving out my place in the world, a patchwork of part-time electrical gigs and half-formed dreams, yet here I was, tangled in a moment that felt too big for my life. Alara, in her late 30s, moved with a quiet grace that belied the weight she carried, her husband Marcus gone just over a year, his absence a silent echo in every corner of the Whispering Oaks apartment. The night's whispers and near touches hung between us, unspoken in the daylight but undeniable, like a current running beneath the surface. She set a plate of toast on the small wooden table, butter melting into golden pools, and sat across from me, her robe loosely tied, hair still tousled from sleep. The lines around her hazel eyes spoke of her 38 years, years of love, loss, and resilience etched softly into her features. "Sleep all right?" she asked, her tone careful, as if testing the air for cracks. "Enough," I said, forcing a half smile, my fingers wrapping around the mug to hide their tremor. Couch was fine. It wasn't. My back ached. My mind replayed every charged moment. But honesty felt too raw in the morning's clarity. We ate in near silence, the clink of cutlery and the hum of the fridge filling the space, punctuated by the distant chirp of birds in the evergreens outside. The world beyond the window moved on, cars rumbling along the highway, but here time felt suspended, caught in the gravity of what we hadn't said. Finishing breakfast, she gathered the plates, and I followed to the sink, insisting on helping. The rhythm of washing and drying a fragile tether to the intimacy of the night before. Our elbows brushed as we worked, each contact a quiet jolt, her fingers grazing mine as she handed me a plate, wet and cool. Neither of us acknowledged it, but the air thickened, charged with the memory of her hand on my arm, the way her eyes had lingered too long. Drying the last dish, she turned to me, towel in hand, her expression a tangle of resolve and uncertainty. "Harlan, about last night." Her voice faltered, her gaze drifting to the window where the hills glowed green under a clearing sky, the storm's remnants fading like a forgotten promise. I stepped closer, heart hammering, the kitchen tiles cold under my socks. "It doesn't have to be anything you're not ready for," I said, though the words tasted like a half-truth. Every fiber of me wanted it to mean something. The way she'd opened up, the softness of her touch, the forbidden spark that had ignited a hunger I hadn't known I carried. But she was Marcus's widow, older, wiser, tethered to a past I could only brush against. Her eyes met mine, searching, the hazel flecked with gold that caught the morning light. "But it does mean something. That's what scares me." Her voice was barely audible, laced with a conflict that mirrored my own. She was 38, a woman who'd built a life with a man now gone, while I was just starting, unmoored but burdened by my own doubts. The world would judge us, friends, family, even Marcus's memory looming like a silent sentinel. Yet standing there, inches apart, those barriers felt like shadows we could step through. I reached out, my fingers grazing her arm, tentative but deliberate, testing the boundary. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand settled over mine, warm and steady, anchoring us in the moment. "I've been so alone," she confessed, her breath catching, a crack in her composed exterior. "And you make me feel seen again, Harlan. But it's not right. Not for you." Her words were a plea, a warning, but her touch told a different story, fingers tightening briefly as if afraid to let go. I shook my head, my thumb tracing the edge of her wrist, feeling her pulse race. "Right or wrong, I don't care about that right now. I care about this." The admission was reckless, raw, spilling out before I could temper it. Marcus had been my mentor, his laughter echoing in my memories of greasy garage sessions. But here was Alara, alive and breathing, her pain and warmth pulling me closer than reason allowed. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she blinked them back, her resolve wavering. "You're so young, with so much ahead." I'm carrying too much behind me." Her voice broke, and I saw the weight of her 38 years, the love she'd lost, the life she was rebuilding alone. Guilt twisted in me, sharp and sudden. Was I betraying Marcus by wanting this, or was I honoring him by being here for her, in a way he couldn't anymore? I stepped closer still, my hand sliding to her cheek, her skin cool against my palm. No, it was mine that was cold, chilled from the morning draft seeping through the window. She touched my cheek in return, her fingers steady, and said softly, "You're cold." The words were simple, almost mundane, but they landed like a confession, unraveling something deep inside me. "Not anymore," I whispered, covering her hand with mine, feeling the warmth spread. Time slowed, the kitchen shrinking to just us, the light catching the faint lines of her face, the grace of her maturity that made her all the more real. She leaned into my touch, eyes closing briefly, and then, as if drawn by gravity, her lips found mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, tasting of coffee and unspoken need, then deepened, a quiet hunger unfolding between us. My arms wrapped around her body fitting against mine, warm and yielding, as if this moment had been waiting to unfold. We pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against my chest, her hands clutching my shirt. "This can't happen," she murmured, but her grip tightened, betraying her words, her breath warm against my collarbone. "Why not?" I asked, tilting her chin up gently, searching her eyes. "Because of age? Marcus? Or because you're afraid?" My voice was low, steady, though my heart raced with the weight of the question. "All of it," she admitted, a tear slipping down her cheek, catching the light. I brushed it away, my thumb lingering, and we stood there, caught in the silence, the world outside irrelevant. We sat back at the table, coffee forgotten, and talked, really talked. She spoke of her fears, that this was just grief masquerading as desire, that I'd tire of her complexities. I confessed mine. Was I ready for something this real, this tangled? Yet beneath the doubts, our connection held firm, a thread woven through shared pain and unexpected warmth. The morning stretched, and we moved to small tasks, me tightening a wobbly cabinet door, her pointing out a smoke detector that needed new batteries. Each act felt intimate now, layered with meaning, our glances carrying the weight of the kiss. But reality loomed as noon approached, the sun high and the roads dry. I had job applications waiting, a life to piece together, yet leaving felt like severing something vital. At the door, my toolbox in hand, Alara followed, her expression torn between resolve and reluctance. "Call me?" she asked, voice small, almost fragile. "Count on it," I said, pulling her into a final embrace, the scent of her lavender shampoo enveloping me. The kiss that followed was softer, sweeter, laced with promise rather than urgency. As I stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut, I felt transformed. Older, heavier with possibility. Driving back to my Tacoma apartment, jazz humming low on the radio, I replayed every moment. The touch, the words, the quiet defiance of what shouldn't be. The road ahead held challenges, whispers from friends, my parents' raised brows, her own battle with Marcus's shadow. But as I navigated the familiar streets, the cold in me had thawed, warmed by her presence, her words echoing, "You're cold." No, I wasn't. Not anymore. Weeks unfolded cautiously. Lunches at a tucked-away cafe on Ruston Way, walks along the Puget Sound where waves murmured secrets against the shore. She shared her world, art galleries in Pioneer Square, hidden trails in Point Defiance Park, and I offered mine, starry drives to Dash Point, dreams of a business that could be my own. Doubts surfaced, like one evening on her balcony, the ring on her finger glinting as she voiced fear. What if this breaks us both? Then we break together, I said, my hand finding hers. Better than breaking alone. Her smile, bright and unguarded, was answer enough,